So after that great introduction, I'm sure one of the questions is, why do I do this? So I'll give you all one guess. Why do you think I do this?
Because you were bullied.
Bingo. I lived through this. So for a moment, just going to ask you to, and then just popcorn style your answers. Think about the best boss you ever had. What were their qualities and attributes? What were they doing, or how were they behaving that they were their best boss? Just some thoughts.
Really good listener.
Good listener.
Kind.
Kind.
Empowering.
Empowering.
Available.
Available. Anything else?
Compassionate.
Compassionate. Caring.
Respectful.
Respectful.
Fair.
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 And what was the impact on you of working with a good boss?
Stronger.
You were stronger,
Dedicated.
more dedicated,
Confident.
felt better,
Successful.
more successful. Okay, let's flip it around. Think about the worst boss you've ever had. If they're here in the room with you, I hope not, pick another one. What were their behaviors? What were their qualities that made them such an awful boss?
Attacking.
Attacking, intimidating,
Presumptive.
demeaning,
Presumptive.
presumptive,
Harsh.
harsh,
Dismissive.
dismissive. Oh, we know that. We know our way around this one. We so do.
Defensive.
Defensive,
Absent.
absent. And what was the impact on you?
Demoralized.
Demoralizing.
I quit.
You quit.
Hated going to work.
Hated coming to work. Stressed.
Physical ailments.
Sorry?
Physical ailments.
Physical ailments. We know instinctively that compassionate and caring bosses bring out the best in us. We know this. But so often, organizations don't deal with the bad bosses. Why is that? Why don't we deal with them? They're intimidating.
Politics.
Politics,
They might be good at their job, they're just a terrible boss.
good at their job but a terrible boss. They deliver results.
We can't lose our jobs.
Can't lose our jobs because to take them on might mean you could lose your job. Yeah. So this talk was entitled Workplace Bullying and Toxic Environments. So the first question might be, what's the difference? I'm going to really focus on workplace bullying today. All workplace bullying makes an environment toxic. Not all toxic environments involve bullying. In fact, I'm just starting with a new client. She's with a department of 20 people. They've had 14 people leave in the last 4 or 5 years. They're not being bullied, but they do have a toxic boss. A toxic environment for me, my definition of it is one where there is low or no psychological safety. I think many of you might be familiar with the term psychological safety. For those of you who aren't, it came out of Google's extensive 2-year study into what was the difference between high-performing teams and low-performing teams. And psychological safety is simply the belief that you won't be punished when you make a mistake. It's highly positively correlated with innovation and collaboration because we won't take risks to speak our minds or question old ways of doing things and suggesting ways of doing things better if we don't feel safe to do so. When we have psychological safety, we feel emotionally safe. And when we feel emotionally safe, we become more open-minded, resilient, motivated, and persistent. And how psychological safety works is that when you put someone in an MRI machine and you subject them to either physical pain or emotional pain, the same brain circuits fire up. Our brain doesn't actually distinguish between physical pain and emotional pain. Either will trigger our innate survival mechanisms of fight, flight, freeze, or appease. You probably know with fight or flight. I'm also trained. I'm a trauma-informed coach. There are actually 4 stress responses, and I teach that when I'm teaching the community resilience model. And so our brains process a provocation by a boss, a competitive coworker, or a dismissive subordinate as a life or death threat. And so while those survival reactions clearly help to keep us alive in life or death situations, they really handicap strategic thinking that we need in today's workplaces, as those same survival responses shut down our perspective and analytical reason. In fact, when I demonstrate this in the community resilience model, when our survival response gets triggered, if this is our brainstem, our limbic system, and our cerebral cortex, pardon me, I'm a bit of a neurobiology geek, we literally flip our lids, as in our big prefrontal cortex, it literally goes offline. So that's psychological safety in toxic environments. Before I get into just a word on terminology, I try to be really careful about this. Sometimes I trip myself up. But in the research and those people who are working in this field, we don't like to use the word bully. We want to refer to the behavior. It's bullying. Because when we accuse someone of being a bully, we are ourselves in some ways being a bully. That's an identity. It's not a focus on the behavior. We also don't refer to the perpetrator. The more neutral term is actor, someone who is engaging in or a bullying actor. We also don't like to use the term victim, because that's disempowering, rather target. So that's the terminology, and I trip myself up. I make mistakes. I absolutely end up saying the word bully every now and then, but for the most part, I try to focus on the behavior, actors, and perpetrators, targets. All right. So what is workplace bullying? There is no universal definition of it, either in the United States or Europe or Australia or the UK, where some of the primary research is all happening across those countries. But there are common elements in all definitions. Firstly and primarily, it is psychological aggression and abuse, and I do mean abuse, against targets through emotional invalidation, humiliation, constant criticism, and other repeated hostile behaviors. It usually occurs regularly, daily, weekly, and it's ongoing. Now, it is possible that one severe incident can be bullying, but most bullying is repeated and ongoing. It's also escalating. Bullying always follows a test, then escalate model. There's that first little aggression, criticism, what have you, you see the reaction, and they escalate it up. So it moves from subtle, low-level aggression like gossiping, belittling personal jokes, to overt, direct, and intensive aggression, such as ostracism, insults, and being told to quit. There are two more stages beyond that, though. There's stigmatization. Now you start labeling the target. Useless, worthless, stupid, they the problem. The actor here is expressing contempt and disgust for the target and just wants to be rid of them. And the final stage is traumatization. The target's ability to cope is completely overwhelmed. The target is vanquished. Either they leave, or they quit, or they get fired, or unfortunately, they commit suicide. I don't know if anyone followed the France Telecom case. Unfortunately, suicide is a real risk for workplace bullying, but either way, the actor wins. There is always a power disparity in bullying. Now, that doesn't mean that co-workers can't bully each other. They absolutely can. But what happens is that there's that first test, the target doesn't respond, or they takes on the criticism, that increases the power of the actor, it decreases the power of the target, and it keeps on going. So, and the target's ability to respond is more limited over time, and they can't really protect themselves from the harm or stop the actor's behavior. Over time, the target has less and less power to defend themselves, and when they finally do try, it's always used against them. Very often when the target now does stand up and make a complaint after this has been going on for months, now they're accused of being the bully. It is health harming. We'll get into that. It is profoundly health harming to the targets, both physical and emotionally. It impairs the performance of target. There's a profound impact on their work, and it is unwanted. None of us ever come to work wanting to be shamed and humiliated and demeaned. It's not why we show up. We show up to do our work. But so often it's like they were provocative. They deserved it. They must have been looking for it. No target ever wants to be bullied. The definition here, that's the more simple, easy one: deliberate, disrespectful, repeated behavior towards another for an actor's gratification. This comes from Valerie Cage. She's a bullying expert in Canada. So that's a sort of just easy definition to use because, as I said, there's no universally agreed upon definition. The difference, and I know you guys had a presentation a while back on harassment in the New York State laws. Bullying is absolutely a form of harassment, but it is not illegal because it is status barred. It's equal opportunity bullying. Yes, a lot of targets are of minority, Hispanic, Latino, Black, but bullying is equal opportunity. The actor will do it to anyone who's threatening their status and power. So that makes it's not protected under the protected classes statutes. We also hear a lot of, well, it's difficult people, or it's personality conflict, or it's incivility. Frankly, those are euphemisms. And it's sort of, and when we use that, and we do that because I think it feels so hard for us to acknowledge the behavior for what it is, it's sort of like it seems pretty extreme. But when we use these euphemisms, what we're really doing is we're sort of missing the point. We're downplaying the problem. We're not seeing the seriousness of the impact, and it leads to the wrong solutions and interventions. This is invalidating. To call it incivility or personality conflict is really invalidating to the experience of the targets. And incivility and rudeness and meanness, they feel awful, they're inappropriate, but they will really trigger a survival response, a threat response in the people who experience them. Bullying does. So, what is bullying? Most bullying, as I said, really starts off subtle. It's below the radar. It's covert. It's a lot of passive-aggressive behavior. It's plausibly deniable. It's happening behind closed doors, one-on-one, and it's very hard to see. We get a lot of, if someone does complain, it becomes he said, she said, who do you believe? And we'll get into why, unfortunately, the actor is usually believed over the target because they have greater power. They're often the boss, the supervisor, and so they're believed over the target. There are a whole raft of typical behaviors. One of the top ones is discounting or invalidating thoughts and emotions. That's called emotional invalidation, and it is a form of psychological abuse. I've got some examples up here on the screen. We're all guilty of this. I know I am. Lord, how often have I used some of these phrases? I tend to be much more aware and sensitive of it now. And the occasional use isn't abuse. It's when it's consistent and repeated over and over. That's when it becomes bullying. It's really a form of gaslighting. Everyone knows gaslighting comes from an Ingrid Bergman movie, right? Where this is basically questioning your reality, and you start to feel as if you're going crazy. What I hear from my clients all the time is that it's crazy making. They don't know what the truth is anymore. And it's very destabilizing and utterly demoralizing. Some other top workplace bullying behaviors are sabotaging you and sabotaging your work by withholding information, resources that you need to get stuff done, making you look foolish by conveniently forgetting tell you about a meeting that you should be at and you discover after the fact, or making impossible demands of you, disregarding or rubbishing objectively good work. Now, we're here about performance evaluations because a top strategy of bullying is using performance evaluations, where they will rate the target as employee as less favorable than the performance genuinely warrants by cherry-picking incidents and putting the most negative spin possible on them and distorting things. And it's an order of magnitude more difficult to disprove this kind of BS than the effort it takes to create it. And all the burden is put on the target to disprove it. And it's virtually impossible because, of course, who's rating them? If it's their boss who is the bully, it's like how the boss is believed because they're supposed to know the performance of the target. And the list goes on, but I won't go through that in the interest of time, but you'll get that in the notes. So some facts and statistics, just how big of a problem this is. Here in the United States, we have the Workplace Bullying Institute. They're a nonprofit out in, I think they're in Seattle, and they do a national survey every couple of years. The most recent one was 2017. And the definition of bullying that they use is repeated health-harming mistreatments. It's abusive conduct that is threatening, humiliating, or intimidating, or it sabotages or interferes with work getting done, or it's verbal abuse. So they have an even sort of stronger definition, and when they use that definition, the results are, and this has been consistent over time in the United States, 19% of people are saying they have direct experience of it. They're either currently being bullied or they've previously been bullied. Another 19% say they've seen it happen. Nearly 40% of our workforce is either experiencing bullying or seeing it happen, and seeing it happen with vicarious trauma. This is not a small problem. This is a massive, massive problem. So who bullies? Sorry for the one man? What? One man in the audience? Two? Yeah, I know, I'm sorry, you men. I get hit on so much these days. But unfortunately, 70% of the actors are men, and of who they bully, 65% of their targets are female, and 35% of their targets are male. Women absolutely bully, 30, but at a lower rate. 30% of women, 30% of actors are women. Their targets are also women, and then 33% male targets. So overall, women are 66% of targets. Who bullies? 61% of the actors are superiors or bosses. It is possible to have bullying between co-workers, but it's only a third of the time. And it is possible, strange though it might seem, I was actually talking to a woman in Ottawa who's gone through this, where it's bottom-up bullying. It's rarer, but it does happen. What do targets do? 29% of them remain silent. They never talk about it. 35% tell their co-workers. 17% informally notify the employer. By informally, they tell them that it's happening, but they don't lay some kind of formal complaint. Only 18% seek some kind of formal resolution. That's made up of 13% who file an official complaint using the organizational complaint or grievance structure. A tiny, tiny portion of them file a complaint with a government agency, typically the EEOC, and then a distant 2.4% file a lawsuit. These are not, the targets are not sue happy. They remain silent first and foremost, or they just talk about it with colleagues. When targets describe what happened to them, are they believed? 71% of them say they are never believed. 20% of them say they were believed at first until the actor was investigated and they got to say their side of the story, and then the organization reversed track. And now they believe the actor over the target. And only 9% were believed. And what ends it? The majority, so T here stands for target, A here stands for actor. So 23% of the people involved, 23% of the targets, 23% of them quit, 12% are forced out, through some kind of constructive dismissal, or, life just becomes so intolerable that they're forced out. 8% are terminated, 11% are transferred. So in other words, if you add that out, the targets are carrying the majority of the burden, 54% of the burden. The actors, 17% are punished through some kind of sanction, but they still keep their job. 11% are terminated, 8% quit. If you add that up, the actors are carrying 36% of the burden. And then lastly, the other option is, what ends it is the organization does an investigation, they create a policy, but they investigate it thoroughly, and that's what ends the bullying. So what's the impact on targets? In a word, it's profound. The research is absolutely unanimous across the world, in all different cultures, at all different levels. The symptoms for targets bear all the hallmarks of PTSD. That happened to me. I can speak very, very personally to this. What that means is they have intrusive thoughts. These are repeated, involuntary memories, distressing dreams, nightmares, flashbacks. They have extreme emotional distress and physical reactivity to any traumatic reminder. For me, still going by that building will still get my heart racing every single time. Another hallmark of PTSD, avoidance. They dread, we heard this word, dread coming into work. They withdraw at work. They hide out. They don't engage. They don't go to lunch. They're not at social functions. That also happens at home. I was talking to one of you earlier. They're not participating in social events outside of the home either. They're not hanging out with their friends. They have very negative thoughts and feelings. They're like unable to recall key events. It affects memory and concentrations. They have very, very negative now beliefs about themselves or the world. They think they're worthless, they're useless, they're a failure. So there's a lot of exaggerated blame. So depression, anxiety, withdrawal, isolation. They have no joy or happiness in anything, and potentially suicidal. Another hallmark of PTSD is what we call hyperarousal. Here is that irritability or aggression. It can also be aggression, which is part of why targets, when they get to this point, when the impact is so profound, now they're accused of being the bullying. But actually, it's accumulation of all that stress. So they can engage in risky or destructive behavior. Might be substance use and abuse, but it can also be other things, acting out at work and at home. They're hypervigilant, that's part of the hyperarousal, where they're constantly now on the lookout for threats. Seeing threats even when objectively there aren't any, heightened startle reaction, difficulty concentrating or sleeping, and anxiety and panic attacks. And there's functional impairment. So all of these symptoms really impact their ability to do their job. It's health harming. aside from, just these profoundly negative mental health impacts of these symptoms, heart attacks, blood pressure disease, sleep disorders, immune disorders, problems of the gut, with the metabolic system, weight gain or weight loss, chronic pain, migraines. These are just some of the physical impacts. Then there are also the other harms, shunning, exclusion. Talked about how much they lose their jobs. They take their stress out. They can't deal with the stress at work. They've got no place to put it. They come home, they take it out on their families. Divorces, broken families, domestic violence, even. The impact on children and the spouses is profound. And then financial loss as well. When targets finally leave or quit, most of them will take a pretty big financial hit because they're just desperate to get out. So they just take any job to try and get out, even if it's at a lower rate, or they're out of work for such a long time from short-term or long-term disability, then when they come back to work, they have to come in at a lower rate. So what causes bullying? This is the hard one, especially I think for HR professionals, because you want to be able to stop this. Bullying cannot sustain itself if the organization does not tolerate it. You're all nodding your heads. You know this. Workplace bullies operate within the established rules and policies of their organization. Not only are they tolerated because they might be high achievers, they're getting results, but at a tremendous price, they're often encouraged and promoted. Bullying only stops when the reward to the actor is not worth the effort. And we can't put that burden on the target. It is the responsibility of the organization. I just feel that, like, the energy in the room is just like, oh my God, this is awful stuff. It's really hard, because I'm just saying like this.
Sorry about that.
Oh my gosh. Thank you all for just bearing with me on this. I know it's a hard topic. It's just interesting in comparison to some of my other workshops where I managed to create a much more engaging energy, but it's a tough topic. Yeah. So bullying will happen in any social system because it reflects just one of the constants of human nature. Aggression, unfortunately, is just part of being human. And given the right incentives and circumstances, any of us can be tempted to pursue our own agendas and needs, regardless of the cost to others. And most especially when the costs to us of doing so are low or non-existent. I don't want to say we're all bullies, but we're all capable of being there. I've had to really recognize that in myself. I don't identify as a bully, of course not. None of us will. But am I capable of being seen as a bully by someone else? Hell yeah. Now, do my behaviors rise to the level of what I've said here? No, and I've obviously, but I think it's not big. I just need us to be aware that we're all capable of doing this, not because we're bad people. But we'll talk about the profile of a bully, an actor, and you'll see, you're really not. You really aren't those people. I know that. And so there are always going to be bullies at work. Because let's face it, most of our workplaces are structured to value individual performance and meeting those targets and driving performance over empathy and collaboration and dignity and respect. So there are always going to be benefits, at least in the short term, to bullying. And, the actor isn't even going to see themselves as being a bully. They will see themselves and even, be rewarded for being a valuable, results-driven, high-achieving performer. So what if I motivate through fear? Gets results, right? There was an organization in Albany that we were sort of trying to get them to do something. And one of the 5 owners was like, so I'm an asshole. So what? Deal with it. It's my right, as it is, to be an asshole. And then, well, as my lawyer said, it's not illegal to be an arsehole. It isn't. And then to the actors, the victims are weak and unable to compete or get with the program, right? But if we remember, we said it's 19% who've had direct experience of it, 19% who've seen it. This is far too widespread for us to say it's a matter of some small number of maladapted individuals. So sadly, that means we have to take ownership of the fact that it is our organizational climates which foster an environment in which bullying can take root through scarcity and competition and job insecurity and role and task ambiguity and up or out policies, and also through social learning, where we come to believe through workplace role models and the response of the organization that it's not only accepted but will be rewarded. And so rippling, so the aggression ripples down through the organization, and when you get those first managers being promoted up to their first time management position, they're looking at their role models and seeing, well, this is how it's supposed to be done. And so the new managers quickly come to view that this form of behavior is acceptable and normal, and so it ripples on out through the organization. So the organization bears the first and foremost responsibility. But of course, so do individuals. We have the actors and we have the targets. What's their role here? So firstly, a sense of entitlement. People bully and harass because they feel entitled to do so. They consider their behavior reasonable and that they have a right to use these behaviors. They don't see their behavior as bullying. They're untouchable. They do what they do because others allow them to do it. We talked about why do we tolerate bad bosses. They're masters at being able to avoid being held accountable for their behavior. And when people try to speak up, the actor is quick to shout them down, and if any issues are brought to their attention, they minimize the problem, they deny, they distort, they deflect, they blame. They never take responsibility for their own behavior. They have a lack of empathy. They're either not aware, so they're either the unaware or the aware don't care about the impact of their behaviors on others. And they won't care for as long as the workplace allows them to isolate themselves from the damage they've done. It would help if I advance to the next slide. So, sense of entitlement, untouchable. They're highly socially intelligent. They're political animals. They have street smarts. They know exactly how to work the system. They're masters of kiss up, kick down. And so that allows them to hide their abusive behavior from their superiors who review their performance. And so as a result of kiss up, kick down, they can always, conceal their mistakes, or if a mistake is, it's like they blame it on their underlings. It's like, or circumstances. It's like they take all credit for success, but any failure is somebody else's problem or beyond their control. They blame any conflicts on a subordinate's lack of competence and poor attitude and character flaws. And, because they're kissing up, they're seen as highly cooperative, respectful, and caring when that's how upper management sees them. But of course, now 360s might get at some of this, but remember, targets remain silent. We'll also get to their conflict avoidant. A lot of this doesn't get surfaced through 360s because 360s aren't asking the right questions. So you need to ask some very specific questions around psychological safety and bullying behavior if you actually want to get a sense of what's really going on. The actors, there's a myth that people who bully have low self-esteem. The research, especially in adults, actually also in kids, it's the opposite. They have high self-esteem, but it's what I would call high but unstable or fragile self-esteem. So any threat to their self-identity or self-concept triggers this outsized response. And this need to sustain their high self-esteem, drives really problematic behaviors, like the constant need for validation and approval, and they're puffing themselves up by putting other people down. And so they don't deal productively with any threats to the self-esteem. Rather, they take out their frustration, anger, and wounded pride out on others. Power and control is central to bullying. Actors value control over cooperation. The more the target attempts to resist control, the more they amp it up. That's part of the escalation process. They're really quick to turn tables, as we've said, and if confronted, they claim victimhood and accuse the target of being the bully. They have low emotional regulation. So we get the yelling, the emotional outbursts, the rages. This is all the unskillful offloading of their own negative emotions, which they don't want to acknowledge or admit or feel. So they shame, they blame, humiliate, judge, put down, insult, rather than deal productively. So, they have huge anger management problems. And of course, others are always to blame for their feelings. Like, you made me feel. Not I feel, they're not taking ownership of it. You made me feel. So who, on the other side, are the targets? Who are they? They're skilled, experienced, highly competent. Prior to their encounter with an actor, they almost always have positive work performance evaluations. They're honest, ethical, principled, and dedicated. They're straight shooters. They value facts and objectivity. They're not whiners or complainers. Remember, they keep silent. Because they feel they must have done something to deserve this, that they've done something wrong, that the problem is with them, and so they feel tremendous shame. They have high emotional intelligence, but low social intelligence. They don't play those political games. That high emotional intelligence, yes, it absolutely makes them more emotionally sensitive. The clients I work with, I'm needing to work on their emotional resilience skills, so they're not taking on others' emotions as much. But that high emotional intelligence is part of what makes them empathetic and makes them great co-workers and, their ability to connect with others. They're not political animals, and they have an aversion to playing office politics. They just want to come into work and do their job. That's all they want to do. They're self-starters and quick learners. This is part of what makes them provocative targets to the actors, because they tend to be independent thinkers. They're contribution-focused, not compliance-focused, and so they're provocative. It's like, how dare because they're not submissive and compliant and subservient to the demands of the actor. They're pro-social and collaborative. They are conflict avoiders, and they're not confronters, and that makes them look vulnerable to targets, to actors. They're easy targets to the more aggressive and domineering behaviors of the actor. And one of the reasons why they don't complain is because complain is adversarial, and they don't like to do that. It's like there must be something they can do to fix it. If they just work harder or try harder or communicate better or be more assertive or be less assertive or be whatever it is, stay in longer, pick up this, they'll fix it, right? But the actor's demands are unappeasable. You cannot appease a bullying actor. So in short, your targets, remember, 70 to 80% of them leave. They're either terminated or they quit or they're forced out. They're real assets to an organization. These are the kind of people you want. They're hard workers. And as we said, it's like almost all the clients that I deal with, it's like so often the advice is, well, you just need to stand up for yourself. Because of who they are, when that first really harsh criticism hits, they take it on, well, there must be some truth in this. Why would this person be saying this? So because they have a greater degree of self-awareness, and so they think, well, obviously this person is giving me feedback, there must be some truth here. So they don't really know how to question it. So they take on so much more than they should. Why it matters. In short, bullying actors are just too costly to keep. Yes, they might be high performers, but when you actually run the numbers, when you look at the reputational costs, now with things like Glassdoor and social media, It's like word gets out there, and because I'm starting to get a little bit known in this community, I'm starting to hear of some of the more problematic organizations. Turnover, and targets are some of your best workers, but they leave sooner or later, or they get kicked out. You've got absenteeism, of course, the sick days, mental health days, short-term disability, long-term disability. Presenteeism, they might be there in body, but they're not there in spirit or mind. Lack of engagement, they're not involved, they're hiding out, they're not bringing their best selves, so you're losing their innovation and creativity. Then, of course, if they do make a complaint, you might have investigation, mediation, litigation, or settlement fees. It's possible to run the numbers. Take out a calculator, run the numbers. You'll see whatever the actor is bringing in, these will add up to so much more. So what to do about it? If bullying cannot sustain itself, if it's not tolerated, obviously it's the organization and addressing the organizational culture itself. That's where the solution needs to be. If you really want to prevent bullying, you have to address the structure that allows it. You can't just punish people who infringe. So this starts with awareness and acceptance that this even exists and is a problem, and that awareness and acceptance has to be at the leadership level. And I was talking to some of you before I was talking, it's like you HR people, you know this is happening, but you can't get your leaders to accept that it's a problem and that it even exists. And we'll talk about how to do about that. You all know, organizational change must be driven from the top. You can't put the burden on staff to drive this change. And so, it really needs to be a focus on awareness, not punishment. So we need an open discussion around bullying. A lot of if it comes up, it's always behind closed doors. It's always hidden and confidentiality, or if someone is forced out, there's some kind of restrictive confidentiality clause. Without, talking about this and without overt sharing of bullying incidents and the impact, the organizational culture that fosters this just remains unchanged. Because the actors are relying on silence, and so they continue to act. And there's a lot more research now on, compassionate organizations and how what they're achieving relative to sort of more aggressive organizations, and the research is really clear. Compassionate organizations are out competing because it just makes sense, right? This is just common sense. Happy, healthy employees, it's just more, they're productive, they're engaged, they're bringing themselves, they're bringing their best selves to work, they're taking fewer sick days. It's like, this isn't rocket science. It's like, if people are happy, they're great workers, It needs to obviously go beyond prevention, and so best practice is to develop a healthy workplace policy focused on civility, dignity, and respect. Because it's not, I wish it were enough, my other coach colleagues who focused on, building up emotional intelligence and building trust between teams, that's all really necessary, but it's not enough just to foster the good. We also have to, for me, and this is why I do what I do, we also have to explicitly address the bad or the negative. Because if we just ignore it, if we're silent about it, if we're not specifically talking about it, it sends the message that we'd rather just not, that we'd rather just ignore about it and keep it behind closed doors. And so it continues. And that undermines the positive changes you are trying to make. Because the negative isn't just going to magically go away by only focusing on increasing, communication skills and emotional intelligence and all that stuff. Of course, any policy will need effective monitoring, robust investigations, and consequences if you're going to make it stick. Otherwise, the policy is worthless and will actually undermine the efforts. So what to do and where to start? Training, absolutely. But training alone isn't enough here. How many of us have been to great trainings? It's wonderful, but then we go back to our desk and we get sucked back right in, and within a week, a month, it's gone. And then, the other problems with training is the unaware don't think they need it anyway. And even if you do get their butts in the seat, it's just it's just like water off a duck's back. So to go beyond training, you really need, from the leadership level on down, but also for the actors and targets, to focus on mindsets and behavior change and skill building. And that just takes time. And I'm going to put in a little plug here, and it's ideally suited to coaching. A really good place for you to start, to try and just get, be able to present the data to your leadership, to show them that this really exists and is a problem, if you think it is in your organization, is to do, an organizational assessment and survey. Focus specifically on psychological safety and asking the questions specifically about bullying behaviors. Because then you can start to actually get a quantitative handle on it. And if some areas of the organization are more problematic than others. Because you won't know until you ask, because it's so hidden. And obviously, it goes without saying, this needs to be anonymous. You are not going to surface the data if people responding to the survey do not really believe, and plus implicitly, that it's not going to be traced back to them. So the use of an independent, neutral third party to conduct the survey is also really helpful here, because otherwise people aren't going to speak up just for, fear of the risk of retribution. It's not going to be easy, cheap, or quick to fix this if it exists, but it is 100% possible. It does need to be driven from the top down. And we need to focus beyond training on driving that culture change through driving changes in mindsets and behaviors. And the mindsets here are huge. These are our mental models. What stories, values, and beliefs do we have around work and the world and how people are, because that drives, the thoughts and the behaviors of what's happening for both the targets and the actors. I work as much on mindset with the targets because they have this they also have mindsets of that unless they're helping, unless they whatever, they're not good enough. So I'm working on building up their self-esteem and confidence. And, coming up actually is a workshop with the Human Services Coalition that I'm doing on March 9th, where, and I know I'm at potential risk here if one of you has already signed up for this workshop, where we're actually trying to get the people who might be the difficult ones into the workshop. The difficult or the unself-aware. So if you have someone in your organization you want to send them here, we specifically worded the workshop to try and appeal to them that, because it's like the team is the problem, they're not the problem. And my job in that workshop, getting to the mindset issues, is going to be, have pity on me, let's hope I can do this, is to gently and kindly and very compassionately lead them into an awareness that maybe, just maybe, it's their own mindset that's part of the reason they're having such problems with their team. I have some very specific tools. There's a whole mindset assessment that we have that is pretty phenomenal. So in that workshop, we're going to be focusing on mindsets, what they are, and how to harness them. As you can see, I don't like to indulge in any kind of shaming and blaming and judging of the actors either. They also need our compassion. Maybe not so much the psychopaths and the narcissists, but the rest of us, absolutely. They're human beings who have every much as right to dignity and respect. So that's very much my approach. One last thing I will say is that I also run a private, closed, and it's actually hidden Facebook support group. And I had to make it hidden because there's so much sense of shame around workplace bullying But it means, what that means is it's unsearchable on Facebook. It won't come up in search results, and no one can see that you're a member of it. If there's anyone you know or you have personal experience around this, if you would like to become a member of that group, it's literally like 3 weeks old, and we're at 140 people across the world at this point. Please just email me. My contact details are there, and I can tell you how to do that. Thank you so much. Nobody asked any questions. I just carried on yabbering. Oh dear. But anyway, now I will absolutely take questions. So questions? Yes?
In my own decades of work experience, I think I've seen something of a pattern in the actors where they have past history of trauma. And I was wondering if you could comment on that in your experience.
Yeah. There's a paradigm we use in the community resilience model from the Trauma Resource Institute. Because so much of bullying is traumatic, we call it the aggressor, prey, witness paradigm, where it's impossible for us to inhabit all three roles. And we see this particularly like for veterans, but also for people who have experienced domestic violence situations or schoolyard bullying. Mm-hmm. Like if you think of a domestic violence situation, if you're the kid, you see, one parent, being violent, verbally abusive or physically abusive, so you, the witness. Then you go to school, and because this is the model, and because you're so, your nervous system is so deregulated, you become the bully at school. And then if you come home and your dad is drunk, now you're the prey. And exactly, it's like trauma, when we go through the common reactions to trauma, and an increase in aggression is definitely one of them. Mm-hmm. It's not the only response, but it is absolutely one of the common responses. Mm-hmm. In that model, we also try to shift from not being just trauma-informed, but to being resilience-informed. Because trauma, you get stuck with what's happened to you. Resilience-informed, we focused on what's right with you. What are your strengths? So it's a more hopeful and positive model. That's why I like it so much. Other questions?
Do you have a model policy? You mentioned having a policy around, I forget the words that you used, but, appropriate work.
I believe it is one on the SHRM website.
Okay.
If you Google, there's the Workplace Bullying Institute has for a long time now been working with David Yamada. He's a law professor at Suffolk University in Massachusetts. And they have a draft healthy workplace bill, which, they test support for that, and there is, at the worker level, there's overwhelming support for it. It does have the support of a lot of legislatures, but it hasn't been passed yet in a lot of legislatures. But if you Google healthy workplace bill, that is more, at the legal, governmental, statute level, but I believe SHRM also has a policy, and if you look at David Yamada's site, I think he also has some draft policies. You had a question?
I do. So what happens when the actor actually targets and accuses that hard worker, right? The person you don't want to lose, that person that has all this, high EQ, all of that, accuses them of bullying behavior. How do we get through that? Because I've seen it twice in the course of 1 year.
You need, and this is what makes it so hard for organizations, because you really need, internally in organizations, to have people who really understand this phenomenon. And because of the greater charisma and power of the actor, they often go with the lead. So it takes a lot of skill.
These people are equal.
It's not, absolutely, it is not easy, but the way you deal with it is you really need to have, to tease it apart, you really need that independent, neutral, third-party, skilled investigation, where you're going in and you're talking to the witnesses, and you're really getting a sense of the whole history. And that goes back, and you look at the target's previous performance, and you look at the actor's previous performance, because this might well have followed them. It's like, but again, we don't want to invalidate invalidate the experience of the actor either, because now we're being bullied. So it's like, because, so it's, and this is why we don't deal with it, because it's so complicated,
And
right?
like you said, the key takeaway I have, for instance, is on that actor, right? So what is that actor dealing with that is making he or she maybe, I don't know, target that other person? So as organizations, how do we focus on giving that actor perhaps what they need?
And implicit in there, and it's a slide I took out, is the difference between the unaware and the aware don't care. Now with the unaware, there's a wonderful TED talk. 95% of us think we're self-aware, only 10 to 15% of us actually are. Tasha Eurek, wonderful TEDx talk. To get the unaware, the way to get the unaware is they can only hear this message from someone they really trust, who they really believe has their best interests at heart, and who has greater power over them. Because when this message comes to them, they're going to get defensive, they're going to distort, deny, blame, offload, they're not going to want to, because it's, again, it's a threat to their self-concept. So you have to be gently hold their feet to the fire, and you can only hear that from someone they really trust. Now with the aware don't care, those are your true bullies, right? And the question of, is it deliberate or intentional? You know it's deliberate if they will change their behavior in front of a superior. Because now they know this behavior is inappropriate. What do you do with them? You have to make them care. How do you make them care? Now you're using the power of the organization. Threatening them, constructively, offering them opportunities to change, give them coaching, give them support, don't just, obviously if you need, but if they're aware, don't care, and you can't make them to care, they cost too much, you need to get rid of them. So the unaware are hard to work with, but possible to work with. The aware don't care, much more tolerant. Yes?
So I have one who's aware and pretends to care.
Yeah. So another slide I took out, we have, it's called the dark triad of personality. Machiavellian, psychopaths, and narcissists. That's the dark triad. Because they have this, if they have the narcissism or psychopathic, they're very charming. They're astute emotional manipulators. They know exactly how to play that pretend, caring strategy. Whew. They're actually therapists take them. it's like Teflon. You can't get anything to stick. It's like, yeah. So there's some wonderful strategies with the narcissists, and for my targets, it's called the Greystone strategy, where you just become completely boring. You just like fading into the background. You not take. The other one is Valerie Kay has some wonderful videos on her website of how to sort of. It's like interesting. Tell me more about that. So are you saying I'm completely responsible for all of last quarter's sales numbers? It's like a little bit more passive aggressive, where you're sort of directly challenging them, but in a very, very calm, neutral way. Sort of because what they will do is they can't back up their assertions. Sorry, I'm getting a little off target there. The aware and pretend to care. Yeah, so they're going to need just a lot of coaching. Or you're going to have to get rid of them if they're a real problem and they're impacting the rest of the team. Send them to the and therapists will take them. Yes?
Is there data from the last 3 years that show that bullying has increased dramatically?
Anecdotally, I believe so. The WBI definitely they did a policy, they did a sort of quick pass on the impact of the 2016 elections. Definitely at the highest levels here, we are seeing bullying being normalized. The more we are seeing downsizing, the more resources, organizations are cutting budgets, the more threat there is in the workplace. Anecdotally, definitely that's what I'm seeing. What else?
I'm curious what you are seeing as the most effective interventions. That's a big question.
When the organization takes this seriously, puts a policy in place, and drives the policy. This is going, when they put the resources behind it. An example of an organization that has done a phenomenal job of this. I don't quite know where they are results-wise with it. And they put it all on public display, which is like, wow. UNICEF had a terrible problem. And they actually put out a public report about this. They brought in a team of highly skilled and experienced independent third-party or experts in the field. They did global assessments. They went in country and did, small team meetings, and they published a whole report. It was all completely transparent and open, with the head of UNICEF sort of saying, this is a problem, we have to change it, this is what we're doing, and actually doing it. So that's one of the most recent models I know of that is just, an organization that is not denying this, pushing it under the carpet, trying to keep it secret. It's like just saying, yeah, we have a problem and we need to address it. And it's coming all the way from the top of the organization.